Hi, and welcome to the Imperfect podcast. My name is Deb Crow, and I will be your host. Join me on this journey as we meet heart-centered leaders from all over the globe. Lots of interesting questions, interesting conversation, and find out what makes a leader. How do they handle uncertainty and complexity? How do they lead in a time that is volatile? Join us. Welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership podcast. It's just been an exciting time over these last 7 weeks since we launched our first episode. And I'm happy to tell you that we are now in 10 countries. We've had nothing but positive feedback from our listeners. And I'm excited again. I know I say that every episode, but I'm excited to introduce you to a wonderful lady that I've got to know a little bit over the last year. Her name is Annie Goudreau. She is the president and founder of VEEV Health and Wellness. This is a lady who has really honed the art and science of aging well. And Annie, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Deb. I'm also excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think it's quite timely given the whole COVID-19, or should I just say 2020 thus far. Now, I know that your experience and your love is in the nutritional world. I know that you love to help, especially people in midlife. So I wanted to start with a question that I'm sure is on many people's minds is COVID-19 has impacted so many people, and we've seen it on TV. And I know that you spoke on breakfast television about the quarantine 15. So that weight gain that people have had due to the uncertainty, remote working from home, boredom, emotional eating. I'd love for you to just chime in on that, Annie, and maybe give our listeners a couple of strategies.
Well, it's been a really, really impactful time on people's health. And I think that this is one of the things that we don't realize is the impact that this has had, not just physically, but on our total body, mind, emotional health, and physical health. So quarantine 15, as we named it, is sadly a reflection of really being thrown in this state of heightened anxiety. So strategies for me, really nutrition is only a small little part. If you want, like if you think about the tip of the iceberg, it's only what you see above the water. What's really important is to look below the water. And I am a huge, huge proponent self, first and foremost from an emotional standpoint, because often what will happen is the weight is not going to be as much of an issue because you're going to be able to address, self-care. So that means even with our restrictions, I really encourage people to very much practice self-care, whatever that means for them. So a lot of what I call rejuvenation, a lot of connection. So to make sure that we feel grounded, even within our state of anxiety, when we know that, we're reaching out, we are acknowledging our needs, and that already builds a little bit of resilience.
Well, absolutely. And I'm a huge proponent of self-care. You and I both spend a lot of time in that space and helping people. And it is very personal. And it does look different for others. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I know that you share your journey about your childhood and your upbringing on your website. And you use the phrase safe world. Can you give our listeners kind of an overview of your story and the meaning behind safe world? Because I feel that phrase is very relatable for a lot of people. And I also think at that time, the way I'm interpreting it is you were looking at that as a stature of your success.
Oh, very much so. Great question. very quickly, in terms of background, I came from an environment with a mother who suffered from a mental illness. And we, at the time, as you can imagine, and the listeners will probably be able to relate to this as well, is that mental illnesses back in the 70s were very much misunderstood. We are just starting to crack that nut at this point, in early 21st century. So think about 50 years ago, it was a massive taboo. And there were very, very little resources. So we grew up in an environment of a lot of emotional instability and a great amount of shame, because everybody used to say, like, just pick yourself up, and get on with your life. And of course, we all know that it's much more complex than that. So it created an environment for me where I felt very much like I had no resources and I was left to fend for myself. And, I am grateful today for what and it brought me some resilience. And certainly I learned a lot about myself. On the flip side, it also created an environment where I believed that I could trust no one and that I had to build this fortress where if I did not engage emotionally, then I was safe. That was my safety. And what is better than throwing yourself into your career and become, quotation marks, successful in a professional way, while absolutely being disengaged from an emotional standpoint. It was all about just, this is going to ground me, and it's going to allow me to feel that somewhere, somehow I have this purpose, even though of course I did not understand it that way, but also without compromising my emotions, because I definitely felt threatened all the time, even though I did not know it.
Well, I think a lot of people feel like that. And you're right. The term, the diagnoses, mental health, and the coupling of no coping strategies and not knowing. We didn't know what we didn't know back then. So
Correct.
very, very interesting. So it's safe to say that the safe world led you to a burnout state. And it's interesting how now you have got yourself back in a healthy space and devoted your business to helping others now.
Yes, and it came at a great price. I don't think I shared this on the website, but I always say, you have to reach a moment of, there's got to be enough pain for change to really come about. You have to have reached a certain level where you go, this is no longer serving me, because for a long time it was serving me. And I say this, with a lot of love and a lot of compassion, but it destroyed I destroyed a lot of relationships, and it came at a great personal cost. And eventually it came to a crisis where I recognized that this trade-off was no longer worth it. And I realized I need to take action to basically understand what's happened to me, so that I can move on with my life, because I was definitely stuck, and I was stuck in this in that safe world that I had created, this falsehood, because it was definitely not serving me, and it was, in the long run, really hurting me. And I had not even seen how much it was hurting me and hurting others. So through a process that also included realizing this career is not serving me, these relationships are not serving me, excuse me, these techniques that I'm using in my life are not helping me. Excuse me, I'm just going to have some tea here.
Well, and I think our listeners will appreciate
Mm.
your honesty and just the emotion that you're sharing from your heart. I think a lot of people born in the 60s and our formidable years, including myself in the 70s,
Mhm.
can relate to this and had, we grew up with the dad worked, the mom was at home. And again, I just don't think there was the coping strategy, and the mental health issues were there. And I think it left a lot of children with that parent who was unavailable.
Very much so. I'm surprised, still to this day, the shame that surrounds people that are affected by mental illness, whether it's the person experiencing it, but how it reverberates to families and the community at large.
Well, 100%. And it's all in the way you choose to view it, perceive it, process it. We could do a whole other podcast on that, couldn't we?
Yes. Oh my God, absolutely.
So if you think about your childhood struggles and the loss that you experienced with your mom, and I know your brother as well, we have that in common,
Yes.
by the way. How do you
Oh,
think it contributed to your leadership today?
it's made me so much more courageous because I had to dig very deep when my brother took his life. Again, there was so much shame. I'll never forget this as we went through, of course, funerals, etc. And I had lost my mom, so I had been to family funerals, and I knew overall, what the overall sentiment would be. But nothing to this day um, equates the sentiment and the feelings that were around my brother's passing. And I refused to go there. I refused to feel shame. Now, I felt a lot of pain, but I really felt the same emotions as if any other causes would have, created his death. And um, so it brought me a lot of courage because I thought, this is my time to really rise. It was very much the beginning of my awakening and seeing that there was a lot more to me than what I had given myself credit for. And honesty to talk about what had happened. It was truly, a critical moment.
Well, I can only imagine. And I'm sure you're looking back at it now with maturity and wisdom
Mm.
and the support that you've had. And I think it brings up a really good question that I didn't even plan to talk about, but I think it's worth a conversation. Grief is such a big, big monster.
Mm.
And I think grief, I've heard it defined in many different ways, but I think my favorite definition is it's love that doesn't have a place to go. So
Oh, that's beautiful.
share with the listeners, the longest distance is getting from grief to mourning. And you can't rush it or it'll just put you back to the beginning. What strategies did you think, and I know self-care is a big proponent as well for you, how do you think you moved from grief to mourning?
I I had to go back to my own experience with mental illness per se having been part of my life because it was the root cause of everything that I was experiencing. So I had to go through and acknowledge what were the emotions that were involved. So, what was my shame, my anger, um, a lot of my frustration. There were so many feelings. I felt like a little bit of the person that gets into the ring, the boxing ring, and you know, I'd hit a I'd hit a couple punches and I thought, I'd be done. And then I'd be like, no, I think there's a little bit more. And then there was a little bit more. Um, I I was struck by how much and how deep there were of emotions that I did not know were there, or that I had suppressed, or that I had pretended were different emotions. So I would shrug my shoulders, for example, in the past, and I would say, we did not know better, right? I'd have these oversimplistic explanations, while, of course, deeper, that was not the truth. The truth was that I was deeply, uh, in pain. I felt guilty because I couldn't do more, all these things. So my process had to be, I need to feel everything that I need to feel. And that was scary as hell, because I felt, oh my God, here I am in my 40s and I'm going to have to feel these things that have been 20 years suppressed. Oh my Lord, this is going to be awful. And, I think that it ties back to your previous question about, how does this make me a more courageous leader? I think that when you descend into these types of emotions and feel them, I think that you see that one doesn't kill you. There's pain, there's sadness, there's all kinds of things, but they're all things that I'm capable of handling because I had to. My father used to say, some people take some interesting actions that we don't understand, but what they're doing is they're having to save themselves. And that's what I had to do. Otherwise, I was going to be consumed by this grief. And I saw it and I still see it in my family. This is not a subject that is easily discussed with them, I mean.
Yeah, I think grief it's a monster topic, and like you said, you have to move through the cycles, you have to acknowledge the emotion, and you have to be willing to really lean in and feel, and it's personal and different.
Mm-hmm.
And self-care is one of the biggest proponents, and to do it without guilt or perception is probably the hardest task and the hardest strategy to really initialize to start the grieving process.
Very much so. And I think that a great place to start is a place of compassion, not towards others, towards yourself. That it's going to be messy and it is not going to be a straight road. But that you're going to allow yourself, to be who you are, and to feel that what you need to feel, and to get to the level of vulnerability that you need to. And in order for that to happen, you need a lot of compassion.
Well, and compassion's the foundation of self-care, and hence my tagline, self-care is not selfish. And a lot of people have guilt to take that time. So thank you for sharing. What imperfection do you possess that you feel has greatly contributed to your heart-centered leadership today?
Oh, recognizing that I've made so many mistakes, and that I did not come from necessarily a bad place, but I came from a place of, I'll say, ignorance combined with, you know, survival. Therefore, I have a lot of compassion for others. And I believe that makes me a heart-centered person. Now, that was not the case before. But with the work that I've done, I definitely see that that's probably a biggest trait, is to realize how imperfect I am, and how that is part of humanity.
I do think it's part of humanity, but it's definitely the catalyst of why this podcast was born, because
Mm,
it goes back to how you felt in your 30s. Success was viewed as stature and exhaustion and nonstop and doing and doing and doing and not allowing ourselves to be.
yes.
It lands up leaving you in a bad place. whether it's illness on a physical level, emotional level, holistically, if you will. And I think that's a huge shift that people have made, continue to make, and imperfection has to reside because perfection is non-existent.
And it's interesting because I see in my practice, so, and I, as you know, I support women's health. I see this, um, this goal that women have of this perfect health. I must have the perfect week where I eat perfectly and I am active and everything is perfect and in my control. It's really, really interesting. I think this is deeply rooted in our society because I constantly working through this with them to understand that, you know, we're living in the gray, and it's within this gray that we have to make the best choices possible at the moment, but they're not always going to be the same.
And having the flexibility and the know-how and just that passion to move forward with that. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you have the 6 pillars of healthy aging, and I I love the World Health Organization. It's a global organization I looked up to when I was case managing, and they define healthy aging as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. So functional ability is having those capabilities that will enable all people to be and do what they have reason to value. So, in
Mm.
your personal and professional opinion, what do you think constitutes healthy aging?
It's to, you know, for me, it's been the opportunity as a human being to do and express who you are into all dimensions of your life until the day you die. I need to be able to enjoy my life, whether it's having the physical capacity, having the emotional capacity, having the social connections required to be able to be experiencing joy and fulfillment and purpose until the day, literally, that you die. You know, it's the difference between lifespan and health span. We're so focused on the number as opposed to focusing on the quality of life, i.e., you know, the health span, that capacity to be able to enjoy life without chronic disease and without debilitating illnesses so that you can enjoy your life.
Well, and it goes back to the point that seems to be the recurring theme here for our conversation is as a volunteer at hospice, I've met people as young as 18 and people as old as in their 90s. And at the end of life, to sit with someone and hold their hand is an honor and a privilege. And the two things that I always hear repetitively is speak your mind and live your truth. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that from men and women of all different ages at the end of life, because when we don't live our life and speak our truth, I think that there's that dis-ease that evolves in the body. There's unspoken emotion. And I just, as a yoga teacher and a health professional like you, it's something that I can't convey enough to people. And I know it's so hard for so many people. And we want to be that preventionist and not the generalist, and help people before they get to that stage in life where they're given the diagnosis or they've become unhealthy. And I think that's the relatability that you bring to your practice that I also bring. And I think there's many other people out there. So I'm hoping this conversation will will resonate with the listeners, because you do want to be functional and have that ability to be healthy, especially in the mid years, which I know you focus on beautifully in your practice.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really, defuncting the myths of aging, because there's many 60, 70, 80, 90 centurions. People are living longer, and being happy is easy and it doesn't cost anything.
Correct. And
And
there
that
are, sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, you touched on the myths of aging. There are so many misunderstood aspects of what aging can be and should be, even though we're not one size fits all. But that ability to be happy and to find fulfillment later in life is missed because we are served a platter of lies.
Well, I love that. Served a platter of lies. That's not inviting, is it?
No, you see, I love food. So many of my metaphors are food related.
Well, I love that. I want to end the podcast with what I call the Fab Four. These
Oh,
are just four fun questions, and just let me know what's just sitting on the top of your mind, Annie. The first one is, what color are you drawn to and why?
purple.
Purple.
It's a happy color. It's an intriguing color, and it has fantastic energy.
I love that. I'm a big fan of purple too. I think it's hard to pick one color.
Yes.
My second question is, what is your favorite memory and why?
Well, favorite. Well, I would say one of my favorite memories, perhaps, um, would be when I completed my first Ironman. And this was a very big achievement from an athletic standpoint. However, it was a much bigger achievement from a mental standpoint, which people don't realize. But it's the mental aspect that was much stronger. And I was surrounded by what I believe is one of the best groups of people I've ever been with. And I felt part of this incredible community, and I discovered that I had been a role model to my nieces who saw what I had accomplished. And of course, to them, I was so old. And I became this beautiful role model to them. And this is something that makes me so happy.
Well, that's a beautiful example and experience, and congratulations. My third question is, what are you enjoying the most at midlife?
Oh, I am so happy. I'm much happier than I've ever been. I think it goes back to your live your truth. I'm living my truth now.
Well, that's a wonderful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question is, what will Annie be doing in her elder years?
I'm going to be writing more. I am going to be surrounded by a bunch of fantastic friends, and we are going to be having more adventures. We're going to be traveling, exploring, cycling trips. That's what I foresee.
Well, that sounds like an exciting life. And like you, I tell my kids that I want to at least be 100. So
Oh,
here's to phase two. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for sharing this space with me this morning on the Imperfect podcast. And I just want to wish you well in your journey and in your business. And thank you.
thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be able to speak about this and for you to allow this space for this to take place. Thank you.
My pleasure. I like to end my podcast with my favorite five things. Follow your heart, have passion, do your best, know your truth, and always be in love with the journey. This is Deb Crow. Thank you for joining me once again on Imperfect, the Heart Centered Leadership Podcast.